Hey, welcome back to Dealer Confidential, pulling the curtain back on dealer transactions. My friend Greg is with me today. We've got a really important subject. This is probably harder. This part of it is probably harder than actually putting the deal together with the buyer and the seller, and that is gaining OEM approval and what it takes to gain OEM approval. Greg, good to see you, man.
Al, how are you?
I'm doing great.
I agree with you. This is in my opinion, this is probably the most difficult aspect of putting a deal together because the OEM is the final decision as to whether you get the franchise or you don't get the franchise. Now, you could spend all the money in the world, give a dealer all the money in the world for a franchise, but unless you get that approved by the OEM, you do not have a franchise. So a dealer from Pennsylvania just texted me and he says, well, I was a dealer in the past, an OEM dealer. Shouldn't I have a better opportunity to get OEM approval now that I'm trying to buy another franchise? Legitimate question.
And the answer is maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. Because you do check the box of having OEM experience, but that's only the beginning. Because as Greg knows, they're going to look at the metrics. First of all, how recently were you an OEM dealer? This is a quick story. I had a general manager teaming up with a buyer once and had 25 years of experience with Ford, Chrysler, and GM. I mean, impeccable resume, had all the right numbers, all the right metrics, KPIs, but had been out of the industry for about 8 years. And an OEM, and I'm not going to name the OEM because I think this was a terrible decision on the OEM's part, but they turned the guy down because he had not been a general manager in the last 3 years. So to this question, Greg, yes, having the OEM pedigree is important, but it's what you do with that pedigree in terms of numbers and how frequently you've been in a store that will really matter. So the answer to that question is it depends.
Exactly. I agree. It's probably one of the most difficult questions there is because we have really 2 or 3 sets of individuals who want to purchase dealers, in my eyes. We have the bona fide dealer operators who own 1, 2, 3 OEM stores already who want to expand. Then you have the guys who we just mentioned about my dealer friend in Pennsylvania who was a dealer, sold his franchise years ago, now wants to get back into the game. And then you have another whole series of individuals who are, and I say this respectfully, who are independents. They are used car dealers. They're used car brokers. They do not have an OEM shingle, and they want to purchase an OEM shingle so that they could get obviously the banking preferences and get greater exposure to the manufacturer and have a franchise.
Yeah.
All of those, any of those could be extremely easy or extremely difficult depending on how we structure it. The most difficult, and we're going to get into some talking of this today, are the independents who want to become bona fide OEM dealers. The second is the guy, my friend in Pennsylvania, as you so perfectly put. He was a dealer, has great credentials, got a lineage, but he's been out of the game. And number 2, the franchise that he's looking for is not the franchise that he owned 10 years ago. Completely different manufacturer. So that means he's starting probably all over.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the number 1 guy is the guy who owns dealerships or a dealership already. And he wants to get same brand, same franchise, maybe in a different different city. And he's the guy probably with the most success or opportunity for success out of all the 3. So let's take a couple of minutes and let's talk about all 3.
Yeah. I mean, you raise a couple of good points. The first one is that independent dealer is probably pretty proficient at selling used vehicles, right? And as we both know, the used vehicle department in a new car store is probably more profitable and carrying higher fixed expense coverage than the new car department. So it's a little bit ironic that the OEM would look with disfavor on a used car operator because that department, that and the fixed operations department, parts and service, is going to carry the bottom line a lot more easily and not more efficiently than the new car department would be. So pretty ironic that they don't look at that experience, that used car experience, as highly as maybe they should. But that's the game that we're playing here, folks. The OEM holds the card, and let's be very clear about this. On a dealership transaction, a transition from one dealer to the next, the OEM has great leverage. And we have to kind of play the hand that we're dealt when we're talking about these transactions, because ultimately we want to be able to put that new dealer in. And the OEM is the ones that we need to serve and please in order to do that, right?
Yeah, you brought up a great point, and that's the and let's stay on the independent subject for just a few more minutes. These independents come approach us, you and I both. They've got financing, they've got liquid assets, and they can afford to buy these franchises. The number one thing that I found, because I'm on the buy side where I deal with filling out all the applications for the OEMs and everything for our buyer. The number one question that a dealer has is, what else do I need to satisfy the OEM? Well, Mr. Independent, if you've been a used car dealer or broker, what kind of experience do you have in parts and service? That's probably the number one question asked by a manufacturer of any of the prospects that we bring to the table. It's great that you know how to sell used cars. Maybe you know how to sell new cars, but what is your fixed op? Really, what is your fixed op experience? Do you know how to run a multifaceted service department? Do you know how to run a parts distribution center? Do you know how to run a BDC and everything else associated with
Yeah.
setting up appointments for service and parts and full callbacks? And there's three letters that mean more than anything to a manufacturer, I should say, and that's CSI. Customer Satisfaction Index, which a used car dealer or independent, some of them, I hate to say it, have no idea what that means. But JD Powers lives on it. All the manufacturers live on it. It is a major ad campaign for most of the manufacturers that they receive all these accolades for customer satisfaction and, more importantly, customer retention. So, Mr. Dealer, whether you're a guy who's owned a dealership in the past and moved on and wants to come back in, or a newbie who owns a profitable independent or brokerage business, what experience do you have in service and parts? It's as simple as that. Now, let's address that. There are ways that we could help a dealer to get around that. Number one,
But before we
yeah.
get into there, let me just, even if the used car dealer has a couple of bays, right, and can make legitimate claim that he's bought a part or two and he's made a repair, we get into warranty work, warranty administration, recalls, factory incentives. There's so many things that are unique about the factory part of this that really puts the used car manager in a little bit of a disadvantage. Let's just say that with the OEM, even though we may be the greatest used car operator in the country, right?
Absolutely.
So anyway, not to interrupt, please.
Yeah, and you're 100% right, because what is next, and you brought up a very interesting point. Pre-owned is probably one of the most profitable departments in a OEM franchise. What is the most profitable department is fixed ops. Usually, the first thing I look at when I look at a financial statement, I look to see what the profitability ratio is for the service department. Is the service department, and it should be, covering 105% of the expense of the franchise? That means the entire service and parts department is paying for everything else. So your new car sales becomes absolute profit. Your used car sales become absolute profit because your service department is covering all your expenses.
Yeah.
Now, if you're an independent and you have no idea what I'm about or what I just said, we're going to have a hard time with the manufacturer. So
Yeah. Service absorption is a big profit lever. You want to get to the point where Greg said where the dealership is profitable on the 15th of the month because the parts and service business has covered all the fixed expense and operating cost of the dealership mid-month, so that those last 2 weeks go right to the bottom line, as opposed to the dealer who's not covering the expense and he's making, 2 or 3 days of profit, or sometimes goes into the next month before he makes a profit. So the service absorption metric is a key point, as Greg just enumerated.
Okay, so I think we jumped ahead with my dealer in Pennsylvania. We jumped ahead a couple of minutes, but I wanted to get that out of the way so he knows that I did respond to his email. So let's get back into the OEM approval process.
Yep.
Let's talk about what is going to be required and what does the OEM expect in the form of contracts, paperwork, profiles. I mean, I'm so tired of asking dealers for their resume. And, these big dealers say to me, "What do you mean? You don't need a resume for me. I own XYZ Motors for 25 years." Yeah,
Right.
you do need a resume. So
Right.
let's talk about some of the things, even before we get started, that maybe we can get our dealers on the podcast starting to think about, like we did on our last podcast, cleaning up your financial statement. Well, this is the next one. What do we need to get our dealers to start preparing for an OEM presentation?
Yeah. Well, let's first point out that not all OEMs put the same amount of credence on each of these things that we're going to talk about, right? So, depending on the OEM, let's make that point. But I think the first thing is financial capacity, right? So, the amount of investment capital is always one of the first things that a seller and a representative of a seller will look at in terms of financial capacity, not just the capacity to acquire the dealership through a bank loan, a down payment and a bank loan, but do they have the capital necessary to meet the operating investment guidelines of the manufacturer? Okay. And those vary, and there's three things that'll drive that. It's the final price that the prospect will pay. It's the amount of down payment that the bank will require. And it's based on one of these things that Greg just alluded to. It's called a sales and profit forecast that will actually generate the working capital guide that is needed to be met in order to meet factory approval. So those three things will drive a lot of the investment capital that is needed. But financial capacity is the first thing. Operational capacity, again, we're getting into that a little bit, but the background, the automotive pedigree of the individual, and quite frankly, you got to be a dealer or a general manager. And why a general manager? Because as Greg alluded to earlier, they want someone who has demonstrated leadership and authority over new, used, parts, service, F&I, rental, the complete profit centers of the dealership. So when a general sales manager or a sales manager makes application, we're still not out of the woods, because many times the OEM will want that general manager title before they will accept the individual as being qualified. Financial, and jump in, Greg, anytime. Financial capacity, operational capacity. Greg hit this earlier. CSI, customer satisfaction, and customer orientation. So, and they're going to be asking for the metrics of the store that this individual, either dealer or general manager, has been working in. Okay. You'll have to actually send the reports for those stores into the new OEM for them to validate and approve, if you will, your operational effectiveness. And then the last one that I'll throw out is just community presence, your social media reviews. Is your personal branding respective? Do you have good references? Do you have a good personal brand? Those are the four main criteria that the OEM will look at in terms of a buyer being presented for a new OEM deal. That's just the start of it, as Greg
Absolutely.
knows.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get into stuff like, facility and the performance of the store as it is. Because if it's a good performing store, the OEM is actually going to look harder at it on a new change than if it was a poor performing store. If it's a poor performing store, they're going to look at it as an opportunity that, hey, with this change, we can make headway, right? We can
Yeah.
we can make a change here and fix a problem that we have in a market,
Right.
right? So these are all the things that come into play when you're applying for a dealership. And I know Ford is probably one that I'm most familiar with, but there's 25 things on their applicant checklist that you got to go through, including verification of funds and a background check and a host of other documents.
Yeah. Now, what we have to first present to our listeners is the fact that this is probably 3/4 of the way through the process, everything that we're just discussing today, right now. We're nowhere near that when we first get introduced to a dealer, or we find a franchise that wants to be sold, or a dealer who wants to sell his franchise, and a dealer who wants to buy a franchise. We are months away. People ask me all the time, how long is it going to take to do this? It could be months 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. It really depends on how prepared the dealer and the dealer group is, number one, to sell the franchise, and number two, how prepared is the buyer to buy the franchise. And we talked a little bit about that last month, I should say last episode,
Yeah.
with our confidentiality. So let's delve into this a little bit more, and I'll walk you through some of the steps of what it's going to take to become an OEM recognized licensed dealer. First of all, as we said before, you got to find a franchise that's willing to sell you their operation and maybe the property, if not lease the property to you. That's just the very, very beginning. We look at it, we decipher it, we look at the dealer's financials, we come up with all this data and information concerning the franchise. We put together a proposal, pictures, usually 20, 30-page proposal that we present to the buyer. So Hal puts together this wonderful proposal about the franchise and the property. And then my job is to find a buyer who wants to buy this franchise. So we take Hal's proposal, we get the NDAs signed, as we mentioned last week, and then we start sending the proposal out to qualified dealers. The last thing we want to do is waste time with I hate to say this, a non-qualified dealer. Example, some of the independents are guys that we know will never, ever, ever get bought by an OEM. So they're really not OEM quality people. They may be if they hook up or buy a dealership that, like you said before, where the GM has been a partner in a OEM manufacturer and he has some credentials. That's another story, but we're not there yet. Al puts together this wonderful proposal. In it, it has, as I said, the pictures, real estate listings. It has maybe appraised values. It has all the equipment listed. We called that FF&E last time. It has everything listed. And then we come up with a purchase price, recommended purchase price from the dealer to our new buyer. Looks good. And we think that we have a buyer or a potential buyer. Now the work really begins. Having Hal put together that presentation is fabulous, absolutely necessary to move to the next level. But now we kick in with making this deal actually happen. Okay. And that's everything we started to talk about just a few minutes ago, 15 minutes ago. And is the dealer purchaser qualified? Does he have the funds? Does he have the relationships with the banks? One of the big things that we'll talk about later on is he able to get a floor plan line, either from the manufacturer or from an independent bank, because they're getting very, very strict with that. Is he able to get working capital if he doesn't have it? Is he able to get a small business loan? And is he a minority? We will be discussing minorities in the near future, probably within the next 2 episodes, because minorities do have a strong pull with OEMs. OEMs want to be fair to all minorities across the board, and they do sometimes favor minorities. So some of the things that I'm going to be looking for before I present my buyers to Hal are they a minority? Do they have the money? Do they have the relationship? Do they have the resume that we talked about? And are they willing to either relocate or assume the responsibility of that franchise where it is? So all of these have to be done even before we get into actually talking about the deal itself and whether the price is right and whether we should put in a letter of intent to the dealer. We're not near letters of intent. A letter of intent means that Hal and I have qualified you. We think you're a viable buyer. We want to present you to the current owner to buy this franchise, and we think that it could be successful when we reach the OEM level. If you don't fill all those check boxes that we've just been talking about for 20 minutes, then don't even start the process, because it's just going to be wasting your time, and that's the last thing we want to do. If you fill most of them and you think that we could work on the rest, then by all means, let's see if you could become a dealer.
Yeah. And just to make it clear, the LOI, the letter of intent, is not what we would send to the OEM. We would need a asset purchase agreement or a stock purchase agreement at that level to even get it to the OEM. But as Greg said, once that APA goes to the OEM, that's when the real work starts. And I would say this, American Express used to say, don't leave home without it. Well, what I'd like to say is don't try to get approved with the OEM without somebody who's been in the OEM circle. And that would be Greg and I for 2, at least on this podcast. We've been inside the OEM tent, and we know what they're looking for in terms of a business plan, in terms of investment capital, and all of all of the ingredients that make this an approvable deal. So you can save yourself a lot of time and effort and money by working with experienced professionals that know how to package your deal through the OEM approval process. And as Greg said, it's time consuming. There's a lot of documents and there's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of quicksand that you
Yeah.
can fall into.
Yeah.
So experience matters, and there will be obstacles, there will be challenges, and we faced a lot of them and we know how to get through them. So
Yeah.
don't shortcut yourself there.
Yeah, Hal, we got about 7 minutes left, and I just want to just recap some of the points you just made. As Hal said before, the letter of intent is just let's put this property in a holding pattern. It's saying, hey, we're interested. We believe we have a qualified customer. I present my client to Hal. Hal presents the client to the dealer and the dealer principal. They say, hey, Joe Smith, he looks viable. Okay, let's sign the letter of intent. And that gives the buyer 60, sometimes 90 days, if not less, to really research and gather all the information they need to go forward with this purchase or asset agreement. So
Called due diligence,
absolutely, and that's
right?
going to be another whole
Yeah.
podcast for us is the due diligence. So
Yep.
that letter of intent is such a preliminary. It's a holding pattern. It's
Yeah.
taking the airplane and putting it on the runway and then saying, okay, you have to wait there for a while until we get all the information from the tower. That's what we're doing. We're trying to get all the information, and it's called, as Hal said before, it's called due diligence. We are light years away from going to the manufacturer. And I strongly recommend, whether it's the seller or the buyer, not to discuss any of this with any of the manufacturers because we are, again, a long way away. We've got a lot of work to do. So let's discuss just for a few more minutes before we end up some of the things that you're going to be dealing with when you really touch with me upon we call it the dealer application. Hal said before, it is countless documents. There are usually no less than 200 to 250 questions on the dealer application that you will get or I'll get for you for the manufacturer. In those questions are everything from, where were you born, your resume, what are your financial listings, what sponsorships have you had, what likes and dislikes do you have, what's your pet's name, you name it. It's all in that application because the manufacturer wants to make sure you're the right person. Now, there have been applications that just fall flat. Even though Hal and I do all our due diligence to represent the person properly or the team properly, there are some things that are hidden away that maybe we forgot to ask, maybe you forgot to tell us, and those could be deal breakers. So the one thing I say before we even get further, and again, we got about 4 minutes left, is we expect absolutely not only confidentiality from our clients, but absolute honesty from our clients. We are not going to jeopardize our reputation on something that was not told to us because, well, you didn't ask me. It's not going to
Yeah.
hold any water.
Yeah.
You have to tell us everything. We have to know exactly where we are with this because the manufacturer is absolutely going to scrub every single thing you say. The last thing they want to do is have a problem with a new dealer that they're putting in probably in a pretty good location. And
Yeah.
that's why it's being sold and resold.
Yep. One last point for me. I don't, even though the dealer and GM pedigree is important, I don't want to rule out the used car dealer or the first time buyer. I've put both of those in stores. But as Greg knows, we're going to have to do some packaging
Yes.
of a qualified manager, which we know of and can do. It's just going to have to be part of the ownership proposal that we have a what's called a management, designee, an operating manager, if you want to call it that, that has that pedigree that can get you the OEM nod. So we do it all the time. We do employee searches. We have contacts that have qualified individuals that are looking for deals. It's not a lost case. It's not a lost cause if you don't have it, but it just makes it harder. And these people can have equity or not equity but they're going to have to be a part of the ownership proposal to get through the OEM.
Yeah, Hal, I think you're right. I was maybe a little bit difficult on the fact that we want perfect applicants, and we're not going to find perfect applicants. We could make perfect applicants. We could help create that, and that's what we're here to do. But
Well, we're
at
deal
50,000,
makers. We're deal makers. All of these things have obstacles. They're all challenges. If it were easy, you wouldn't need us. So, as Greg said, we need your honest, straightforward background. If there's anything that's less favorable, we need to know it because there's some things we can do to get around these things, right? And if you're short on experience, then we'll find somebody that you'll want to partner with to get you the deal if that's what you want.
yeah, and you know what, Hal, you're 100% right because we recently put a deal together. I won't mention the name, but what happened was we had a bona fide dealer principal who recently, within the past 2 years, sold his franchise, thought he'd go on his boat and go fishing, and became bored, wanted to get back in the game, but he did not want to get back into the game the way he was before, operating, 200 hours a week, the whole thing. He says, can I buy myself into a partnership or relationship with an existing group or dealer? And that's what Hal mentioned before. And I think that's something that I didn't mention before, and I apologize for that. We could, and Hal said before, we have a Rolodex of these former dealer principals who may want to get involved, maybe not 80 hours a week, but maybe they want to be on the board of directors. Maybe they
Yeah.
want to be on the advisory board, which in some cases is good enough for the OEM, knowing that they had Joe Smith, who ran 10 dealerships in the past and owned the stores and the properties. And he retired and he's coming back out of retirement because his boat ran out of gas and he wants back in.
Yeah.
Excellent opportunity for everybody involved with somebody like that.
Sure. Yep.
Hal,
Yep.
that's about it. What are we going to be doing next week?
Next one is how to value your dealership. That could be a 3 podcast mini series. Probably even go on Netflix with that one. But no, that's an important question. How to value your dealership. We'll be looking at the value drivers and how to put some numbers on those. I'm excited about that one because that's every seller wants to know how to value their stores. So looking forward to the next time out.
Yeah, a little housekeeping. We asked in the information about the podcast number 2 that you look at the link is there to go to our YouTube page, and we ask you to subscribe. Subscribe for a couple of reasons. When you subscribe, we know who you are, and then we could accept your emails, your questions, your phone calls, or whatever. Number 2, by subscribing, we're creating a email list that we're going to send a proprietary newsletter every week to, going over what we just discussed, but then getting some additional inside information that Hal and I both feel we couldn't really discuss too much in the podcast, but we can get into it in a newsletter, the follow-up. So go to our YouTube channel, view the episode. If you like it, give us a thumbs up. No matter what, please subscribe because we like to send you out the additional information that could really, really help make this a lot easier for everybody involved. So
Yeah,
subscribe.
we want to build a community, right? I mean, no one's got all of the answers, right? So if we build this community, we'll be able to take questions, share a lot of information amongst each other. We're going to be having some guest speakers come in from time to time and bring some specific expertise in. We're having fun. We hope you guys are enjoying this, and we look forward to a lot of subscriptions and more podcasts coming here in the future.
Thumbs up.
All right.
That's
Thanks,
what we're
Greg.
looking for. Thanks, Hal.
All right. Good to see
Next
you.
time.
You bet.